The heavy pine door of the cabin groaned on its iron hinges as it swung open. Elias Vance stood in the threshold, the thin, cold air of the Montana Rockies filling his lungs. At 62, his body was a road map of a hard-lived life, shoulders still broad, hands calloused and scarred, and eyes the color of worn slate that missed nothing. He had been still for too long, listening. The wind through the firs usually carried a specific rhythm, a pattern as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Today, there was a break in that rhythm, a silence where the jays should have been scolding, a disturbance. He stepped out onto the worn deck, his bare feet silent on the ancient wood. He wore only a pair of worn canvas pants and a thick wool shirt, unconcerned by the chill. The mountain was his sanctuary, a place he had chosen specifically for its remoteness. After 30 years of service, 20 of them as a sniper with the SEALs, the need for crowds, for noise, for the performative aspects of society had evaporated. Here, the only hierarchy was the immutable one of nature. The only strategy was survival. The only lies were the tracks of animals in the snow. He didn't reach for the high-powered rifle propped just inside the door. Not yet. First, he observed, a faint glint of sunlight on metal, miles down the switchback trail that served as the only road to his property. It was a vehicle, parked where no vehicle should be, and the land for 50 miles in every direction was either protected wilderness or owned by him, deeded to him by a government thankful for services rendered in places that didn't officially exist. Trespassers were rare. Hunters, bound by a different set of laws than the animals they pursued, were rarer still. The locals knew better. They knew the story of the old man on the mountain, the one the county sheriff referred to, with a wry smile, as a consultant best left undisturbed. But Elias went back inside. He pulled on a pair of worn leather boots, the soles molded perfectly to his feet. He took the rifle, a custom-built .300 Winchester Magnum, a tool of his former trade, from its rack. He didn't check the scope. It was always zeroed. He didn't check the action. It was always oiled and smooth. He slipped a satellite phone into his pocket, more out of habit than intention, and stepped out into the cathedral silence of the woods. And he moved through the pines and firs like a ghost, a man who had learned to subtract his presence from an environment. He didn't walk on the trail but parallel to it, 50 yards in, using the terrain for cover. He had mapped every rock outcropping, every fallen log, every drainage ditch on this mountain. It was his sniper's nest, and he knew every angle of fire. After an hour of silent tracking, he found their camp. It was sloppy and arrogant. A high-end camping stove hissed on a flat rock. Not too expensive tents, the color of desert sand, were pitched in a small clearing. A rented all-terrain vehicle was parked nearby, its key still in the ignition. But the sloppiest thing of all was the deer. A magnificent 12-point buck, its life stolen not by a clean shot but by a panicked, gut-shot scramble, lay field-dressed but not properly packed, its offal left in a steaming pile to attract every bear and wolf in the county. This wasn't hunting. This was butchery. See, Elias settled into a natural depression in the earth behind a fallen log, his ghillie cloak, a remnant from another life, breaking up his outline until he was just another part of the forest floor. He didn't have to wait long. They came crashing back into the camp like they owned the world. 2 of them. One was tall and lanky, with the soft hands and loud voice of a man used to giving orders in a boardroom. The other was shorter, stockier, a physical presence meant to intimidate. And the big one was carrying a compound bow, the kind that cost more than most people's cars. The tall one had a high-powered rifle with a massive scope slung over his shoulder, a weapon for shooting from a stand, not for the kind of tracking they'd failed to do. They were arguing. "I told you it was a clean shot," the tall one yelled, his voice echoing in the quiet woods. "It was running, you idiot. You blew its damn guts out." The stocky one shot back, throwing down a coil of rope. Now we gotta pack this thing out fast. That blood trail is gonna bring every predator in the state down on us. We need to get the meat and get the hell out of here. We're not leaving without the head, the tall one insisted, his voice petulant. That's the whole point. A 12-point. My wall is waiting. Elias watched them. He saw the lack of awareness, the way they focused on their argument instead of the woods around them. He saw the expensive gear, the rented vehicle, and the total absence of respect for the life they had taken. They were predators of a different kind, the kind who took without understanding the cost. He could have announced himself. He could have walked into the camp and told them to leave, to never come back. But that wasn't his way. He had learned that men like this, men insulated by money and ego, didn't listen to words. They only understood consequence, and he was a patient man. He had once waited 3 days in the mud for a single shot. He could wait a few hours. He waited as they argued. He waited as they finally, grudgingly, began to pack up the meat, wrapping it in soiled tarps. He waited until the sun began its slow descent behind the western peaks, casting long, cold shadows. That's when he moved. He ghosted back down the slope, circling around to the switchback road where their rental SUV was parked. It was a shiny black Mercedes, utterly out of place against the gray rock and dark pines. He looked at the tires. They were standard road tires, completely unsuitable for the terrain they were on. A simple, effective plan formed in his mind. He worked quickly and silently. Using his K-bar knife, he didn't slash the tires, which would be obvious. Instead, he carefully, precisely sliced the valve stems on all 4 tires. It was a slow leak, not a blowout. They wouldn't notice until they were already committed, already driving down the treacherous, winding road. It was a lesson in preparedness. He was 50 yards back into the tree line when the 2 men, loaded down with poorly packed gear and the antlered head of the buck, finally made it to the vehicle. He watched them throw their stuff in the back, heard the engine roar to life with a throaty growl. The Mercedes lurched forward, bouncing over rocks it was never designed to handle. Elias began to jog. He wasn't following the road. He was taking a direct line through the woods, and a path he knew that would intersect with a switchback a mile down. He moved with the fluid grace of a man half his age, his breathing even, his focus absolute. He reached the overlook, a sharp turn with a sheer drop on one side and a rock wall on the other, just as the Mercedes came into view far below. It was moving too fast for the conditions. The driver overconfident in the car's German engineering and his own city-bred skills. Elias watched through the scope of his rifle, not aiming, just observing. He saw the car lurch as the first tire went soft. The driver overcorrected. Then a second tire. The vehicle began to fishtail on the loose gravel. It happened in a terrible, silent ballet. The car slid sideways, the rear wheels catching on the edge of the drop. For a moment it teetered, a dark metal beast suspended between the road and the abyss. Then, with a final groaning lurch, it tipped over the edge. The sound reached Elias a second later. A crashing, rending, metallic scream as the vehicle tumbled and rolled down the steep rocky slope, finally coming to rest against a cluster of ancient piers 200 feet below. Then, silence. The forest held its breath. A single jay began to scold. Elias didn't move for a long time. He watched the wreckage through his scope. There was no movement, no cries for help. The gas tank hadn't exploded, a small mercy. He scanned the area, his sniper's eye cataloging every detail. It was a bad fall, a very bad fall. And he lowered his rifle. The old law of the mountain had been enforced. Not by him, not really. By their own arrogance, their own disrespect. He had simply been the catalyst, the one who pointed out the flaw in their armor. He felt no thrill, no satisfaction. Only a deep, weary sense of rightness. This place demanded a certain humility, a certain honesty. They had brought neither. He shouldered his rifle and began the long walk back to his cabin. He would make a call on the satellite phone, not to 911, but to a specific number at the county sheriff's office. He would report an accident, a vehicle off the road. He would give the location with the precise accuracy of a man who had once called in artillery strikes. He would not mention the cut valve stems. That detail belonged to the mountain. It was a secret the trees would keep. Back in the warmth of his cabin, with the fire crackling in the stone hearth, Elias poured himself a glass of bourbon. He sat in his worn leather chair, the rifle leaning within arm's reach on the wall, and looked out the window at the darkening peaks. The distant thrum of a helicopter, a rescue bird from the county, eventually broke the silence, its searchlight probing the darkness where the black Mercedes lay. He watched it for a moment, a tiny, frantic insect against the vast indifference of the mountain. He took a sip of the bourbon, the liquid a slow burn in his throat. The forest outside was quiet again. The jays had returned. But the natural order had been restored. Elias Vance, retired, continued his watch. The mountain had dealt with the trespassers. It always did.